Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop, where today we're going to build a couple outdoor planters. This 3-foot long one with slatted sides, and one a little bit fancier. It's square. There are finials at the tops of the corners and raised panels for the sides. They're a lot of fun to build, and I'll show you how next, right here on the new Yankee Workshop. Now here's a good one. It's made from wood. In fact, it almost looks like an old sea captain's chest. Nice. Wow, look at this place. We have a nice English garden bench out here. And oh, this is what I'm looking for. Sort of a classic English planter. Nice turned finials at the top of the post and some raised panels on the sides. I think we can get some ideas here. Well, after looking at all the planters that were available on the marketplace, here's what we came up with. This is our large planter. It's about 36 inches long and 16 inches wide, fairly straightforward joinery, and slats for the sides. Now over here is a little bit fancier one. It's a square planter. And on the corner post, we'll make a finial that I'll show you how to do on the lathe. I have mortise and tenon joinery, and the sides are raised panels that I'll show you how to make at the table saw. Now, the most difficult thing in doing this project was picking the right wood, because this is an outdoor project. It's going to be filled with earth, and it's going to be damp. So I want to show you some of the choices. Now, over here is the budget choice. Very easy on the pocketbook. Pressure-treated southern yellow pine. But it has this heavy grain characteristic, which means I might want to paint it or stain it, and that sort of defeats the whole purpose. A very good choice would be redwood, but you have to be aware that when it gets wet, it tends to turn almost black. We could use western red cedar. It's resistant to decay and rot, but it's soft. It will weather nicely. Here in New England, we've been building our porches and decks with straight grain Douglas fir for a long time, and some people even make window boxes out of them. What I'm afraid of here is that the wide panels I'm going to need for the raised panel might check or split. Now the premium choice is this material, plantation-grown teak. It's very pricey, and it does have silica in it, so it's tough on the tools. So we'll return to our old favorite, swamp cypress. I want to show you some of the characteristics about this wood that I really like. Out here in the back of the shop is an Adirondack chair that I built 3 years ago, and it's lived out here. You can see that it's weathered to a beautiful silvery gray. And what I always look at outdoor projects are the places where I have end grain in contact with the ground. Now here, after 3 years, an untreated piece of wood shows no sign of insects or rot. And if you look out in the woods, you see our 2 dovecotes. And they've been there about 8 months, starting to weather nicely. But more importantly, the wide boards are still nice and flat, which means it's a stable material. I also want to take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now today I think we'll get started by building the small planter. And the first thing to do is turn the finials at the corner post. So I've mounted a blank in my lathe that's 2 inches square, and I've drawn a line that separates the area I want to remain square and where I want to turn the finial. I'm going to start the turning by using this skew chisel to just score it right at the line, so that I minimize chip out at the corners. Then I'll turn to my gouge and round off the area that's going to become the finial. Now I'm going to turn to this parting tool just to finish making the cylinder up to my score line. Well, now that I've rounded out the top to a cylinder, I'm going to use a ruler to mark out the transitions of the various parts of the ball. So I'll just run the lathe at a low speed. Now this mark will be the bottom of the ball, this will be the middle of the ball, and this will be the top. Now I'm going to return to the parting tool. Now back to the gouge. Okay, I'd say that is pretty good. Now I'm going to slide my tool rest back over and use the same skew chisel that I started with to just cut it off. Now we'll just sand the very top. 3 more to go. For the last few minutes, I've been here at my stationary mortiser, making the mortises in each post. Well, here I'm starting to form the tenons on the ends of each rail. And the first cut is a shoulder cut, which will be right here, along the face on the outside and on the inside. Well, now I'm cutting the shoulder cuts at the top and bottom of each rail. And all I've done to the setup is raise the blade an additional 1/8 inch. I've just cut the top and bottom of each tenon using my tenoning jig, which is simply a device that fits in the same slot as the miter gauge. It's a perfect right angle, and it's very useful for holding narrow pieces vertically. It also has this quick clamp to secure the piece in position. Well, after making a slight adjustment to my tenoning jig, I've just completed the cheek cuts on all the tenons. Now I need to put a groove in all the rails and in the post at the corners to receive the raised panel. Now that's the first of 2 passes to make the groove in the rails. You might have noticed that I've clamped 2 rails side by side here at the workbench, and that's to give me a wider base onto which to run the router. Now I'm using a 3/8 inch spiral type bit and my guide fence. Now I could make the depth of this groove in 1 single pass, but I think I have better control of the router using 2 passes. Now in the post, the idea is to run the groove from mortise to mortise. Raised panels are next, and there's several different ways to make them, with a router or a shaper, but one of the easiest ways is on the table saw. First, you need a fine-tooth carbide tip blade, and in this case I've tipped it to 8 degrees. Next, a little jig with a U-shaped bottom that fits over the rip fence to guide the panel through with a high side that's perpendicular to the saw table. Now here's one of the blanks correctly sized, and it's actually made up of 3 boards assembled with waterproof glue and biscuits. And what I want to do is first cut the end grain, so I put it vertically in the jig, clamp it with this spring clamp, and I like to use another stick to hold it tight against the jig as I push it through. It works great. Well, even with a real fine saw blade, it's still necessary to do a little sanding to remove the saw marks. Well, now for some assembly. I'm applying glue to both the mortise and the tenon. The glue that I'm using is actually relatively new. It's a waterproof glue that you don't have to mix up. You use it straight out of the bottle. Now, when I made the panels for these sides, I let them float in there. They're a little undersized so they can expand a little bit, and they're not glued in. Now that's 1 1¼ inch nail through each mortise and tenon joint, and that should be enough to pin it until the glue dries. Now we'll slip in another one of these rails and then slide in the panels for each side. Now before I secure the joints with those nails, I want to clamp it nice and tight. After about 10 minutes, I can remove any clamps remaining. The glue will reach full strength in about 24 hours. Now, aside from the floor, this one is complete. I think I'll turn my attention to the larger one, and I'll start working on these corner posts, which need dados to receive the rails, and I'll make those over at the radial arm. Here I've taken the time to clamp all 4 corner posts together and do the layout for the dados. I've set up my stacked dado head cutter in the radial arm for a 3/4 inch width, adjusted the height, and now I'll be able to plow out that material. Well, now I'm just going to flip all the pieces 90 degrees and complete the dados. Now, to make the grooves in the rails and the post for this planter, I'm using the same techniques as I used earlier, except that I've switched to a 1/2 inch bit. Now here I just applied one of several chamfering details. The one I just ran is the bottom edge where it meets the panel section. I'm also going to use a similar chamfer on the corner of the post, another one along the top edge of all the rails, and I'll also do the top and bottom of each post. All of those are accomplished using this chamfering bit. Now here I don't need a guide fence because the ball bearing is what guides the cutter. The slats for the side of this planter are made from 1/2-inch thick stock. And the side that faces out, I want to slightly chamfer the corners. Now, I'm not going to use my router for that. I'm going to turn to my joiner, where I've taken the guide fence and tipped it 45 degrees from vertical. Now that's the effect of a couple quick passes. Well, 35 more pieces to go, and then I think I'll call it a day. We'll come back tomorrow morning and finish these up. Well, I got started here this morning at my miter box, which I've turned to a 45-degree angle so that I could just knock a little bit of the corner of each rail off. I'll show you why that's necessary. Where the rail comes into the post, you need to remove that corner so that they'll intersect properly. Just a little miter. Now, with that complete, there's one more step I want to do, and that's to drill some holes in each post. And you can see here there's a little plug. Behind that plug there's a screw, one that goes into the short rail, and then on this side, one that goes into the long rail, slightly offset so that they miss each other. To do that job, I'm using my drill press and this little device. Normally I use it in my handheld drill, but it works just as well in the drill press. This portion drills the pilot hole for the screw, and over here, this section will make the counterbore, about 1/4 of an inch deep. Let's see, I'm going to need some plugs of the same material to fill those counterbores. So I'm going to turn to my plug cutting set in this box. See, there's a whole series of cutters that have a hole in the center, a little sharp area here which will turn out the plugs. This set contains 5 different sizes from 1 inch down to 3/8, which is what I want to use today. Well, as you can see, simply plunging the cutter into a piece of scrap cypress makes quick work of forming the plugs. To assemble all the joints on this planter, I'm using the same waterproof glue that I used earlier. I'm just going to slip it into position, put a clamp on it to hold it, while I secure it with some screws. And these screws have been treated so that they won't rust, and it's unnecessary to drill a pilot hole in each rail because the screw has these little wings down at the bottom which actually act like a drill, pre-drilling a hole. Now the slats. Now the first slat at each corner, I want to just tap it. Just get it engaged in that groove about 1/8 of an inch. The rest of the groove will be used for expansion. And now it's just a matter of slipping them in one at a time. Now on the middle 2 slats, I'm going to add a little glue in the groove. And I'm doing that because most of the expansion will take place to each outside edge. But more importantly, I want to tie the top and bottom rail together to add a little strength to the side of the planter. Now for the ends, I'm not going to use any glue. The slats will just fit in loosely. Now for the plugs, I simply use a small screwdriver just to pop it out of the scrap piece of wood. Apply a little bit more glue to the edges. Just pop it into place. After the glue dries, I'll just plane off any excess and then sand it smooth. And for the bottom of the planter, I'm using some second-grade stock that I've been saving for this purpose, and it just sits on the inside ledge of the lower rails. And I'm making sure to leave about 1/8 of an inch space between for good drainage, and I'll just secure them in place with some nails. Well, I got to tell you, I think I feel a little bit out of my element doing this part of the job. And I don't understand how gardeners can do their work without a power trowel. What do you think? I think these planters are really going to brighten up the workshop. And you know, using this long-lasting cypress means that we'll be able to enjoy them not only this year, but many years to come.
Norm's back tomorrow with 2 more makes, a pantry table at 1:30 and a sideboard at 2. Next this afternoon, the cutting-edge woodworker becomes the boy in the bubble. Keep it H&L.